An unknown woman wrote to me, "Your husband bought me a house. We are getting married next month." My husband was sleeping next to me. I quietly got up and called a notary at 2 in the morning. When he woke up, he discovered that, "Good day, dear listeners. It's Briella again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to believe that a quiet life was the same thing as a good life. We had the house on Sycamore Ridge, a 4-bedroom colonial in a suburb north of Atlanta, Georgia, with a wraparound porch Daniel had promised me when we were still dating. I remember standing in the backyard the day we moved in, holding a glass of sweet tea, thinking, this is it. This is the thing people spend their whole lives chasing. We had 14 years of marriage behind us, a golden retriever named Chester, and a joint savings account that I had quietly, methodically built through 12 years of working as a hospital administrator. Daniel was in commercial real estate. He had charm the way some men have height. It just came naturally, and he never thought twice about it. I was 41 years old. I thought I knew my husband. The first signal came so softly I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday in February. I remember because I had just filed the quarterly budget reports and come home early with a headache. Daniel's car was in the driveway, which surprised me. He was supposed to be showing a property in Buckhead until 6. When I walked in, I found him at the kitchen island, phone face down, a mug of coffee in front of him that he hadn't touched. He looked up at me and smiled, but there was a half-second delay. The kind of pause that a wife of 14 years notices and a stranger never would. "You're home early," he said. "So are you," I said. We left it there. That was the first signal. After that, I started noticing the texture of things I had previously ignored. The way he angled his phone screen away when I walked into the room. The new gym bag, slate gray, expensive looking, that appeared in the hall closet without explanation. The Saturday in March when he said he was playing golf with his colleague Ronnie, and I ran into Ronnie's wife at the Whole Foods on Old Milton Parkway, and she mentioned that Ronnie had been in Charlotte all weekend for a conference. I didn't confront Daniel about Ronnie. I told myself there was probably an explanation. I told myself a lot of things in those weeks, the way you do when you're not ready to know the truth yet. By April, the explanations were getting thinner. He started working late on Thursdays, always Thursdays specifically, and coming home smelling of a soap that wasn't ours. Not cologne, not cigarettes, not anything dramatic, just a different soap. Lavender and something else I couldn't name. I stood next to him while he brushed his teeth one night, and I thought, who are you washing off? I said nothing. I watched. I kept my suspicions in a small, locked room inside my chest, and I went to work and made dinner and walked Chester and paid the bills. Because I was the one who paid the bills. And I told myself I was waiting for certainty before I did anything irreversible. Certainty arrived at 2:17 in the morning on a Wednesday in May. I had been asleep, and then I wasn't. My phone lit up on the nightstand, a text from an unknown number. I reached for it the way you reach for anything in the dark, automatically, without thinking. "Your husband bought me a house. We're getting married next month. I thought you should know. Brittany." I lay still for a long moment. Beside me, Daniel was breathing steadily, one arm thrown over his face, completely asleep. The bedroom was dark and familiar. The same curtains we'd chosen together at the Home Depot on Highway 9. The same faint sound of Chester shifting in his bed in the corner. "Your husband bought me a house." I read it again and again. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. I had always imagined that a moment like this would shatter something physical in me, that my hands would tremble, that I would gasp, that something would break. But what I felt instead was a cold, sinking clarity, like stepping into still water and suddenly understanding how deep it goes. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. I looked at the ceiling. I thought about the joint savings account. I thought about the house on Sycamore Ridge, which was titled in both our names. I thought about Daniel's business accounts, which I had co-signed when he first started the firm 11 years ago. I thought about everything that was ours, and I thought about how quickly ours could become his if I moved slowly. Daniel slept. I got up quietly without turning on a light. I walked to the kitchen, picked up my phone, opened my contacts, and scrolled to the name of a woman I had met once at a charity dinner. A notary and estate attorney named Margaret Cho, who'd given me her card and said, "Call me if you ever need anything." It was 2:23 in the morning. I called her. She picked up on the third ring. Margaret didn't sound alarmed. That, more than anything, told me she had heard worse. "Give me 60 seconds, she said, and I heard the soft rustle of someone sitting up in bed, finding their footing. When she came back on the line, her voice was even and professional. "Okay, tell me," I told her. I kept it brief. The text message, the name Brittany, the claim about the house, the fact that my husband was asleep 30 feet away. Margaret listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said something I will never forget. "Don't touch anything joint until we talk in person. Don't move money, don't sign anything, don't say a word to him. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 8? "Yes," I said. "Good. Screenshot that message right now and email it to yourself. Then try to sleep." I took the screenshot. I did not sleep. I spent the rest of that night sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, working through what I actually knew about our finances. It's a strange thing. You live inside a life for 14 years, and you think you know its shape. And then you sit down at 2:30 in the morning, and you start drawing the map, and you realize how many corners you'd never looked around. The house on Sycamore Ridge, purchased in 2013, jointly titled Current Estimated Value Approximately $680,000. Remaining mortgage, around $210,000. I had made every single mortgage payment from my salary. Daniel's income had gone into his business account, which he called operational, and which I now admitted to myself, never looked at closely enough. The savings account, $94,000. Both names on the account. His business, Hartwell Realty Group, 11 years old. I was listed as a co-signer on the original incorporation loan, which had been paid off in 2019. After that, I had no formal role. What assets existed inside that business? I didn't know. And then there was the other house, the one he had apparently bought for a woman named Brittany. I wrote that down on the legal pad and stared at it. He bought her a house. In commercial real estate, a man has access to listings, to off-market deals, to shell companies and creative financing, and 100 ways to move money that look, on paper, like ordinary business transactions. I had trusted him. I had trusted him completely. That was the first real wave of something I could only call grief. Not anger, not yet, but a deep, heavy sorrow for the woman I had been 12 hours earlier, the one who thought she knew. I gave myself 5 minutes for that feeling. 5 minutes at the kitchen table, in the dark with Chester's warm weight against my feet. Then I turned the legal pad to a fresh page. What did I have? I had my income, stable, documented, $127,000 per year. I had my name on the house. I had 14 years of marriage in the state of Georgia, which is an equitable distribution state, meaning marital assets are divided fairly, though not necessarily equally, upon divorce. I had Margaret Cho's phone number and a 8 a.m. appointment. I had the screenshot. What did I need? Evidence of the other house. A property record, a deed, anything that put Daniel's name on it. Evidence of where the money had come from. And time. A little time in which Daniel believed nothing had changed. That was the first shape of the plan. Information before action, silence before movement. I could not afford to tip my hand before I understood the full board. I also thought about Brittany. I thought about her for a long time. She had texted me, a stranger's wife, in the middle of the night. Why? Out of guilt? Out of cruelty? Out of some misguided sense that I deserved to know? Or, and this thought arrived slowly, but it arrived. Had she done it because she was afraid of something too? Was she perhaps not as secure in Daniel's promises as she believed herself to be? That question I filed away. It would matter later. By 6 a.m, Daniel's alarm went off in the bedroom. I heard him move, heard the shower run, heard the familiar domestic sounds of a man who believed his life was exactly where he had left it. I put the legal pad in my work bag. I washed my face. I made coffee. When he came downstairs, I handed him a mug and asked how he'd slept. Like a rock, he said, and kissed my cheek. I smiled. My hands were perfectly steady. At 7:40, I told him I had an early meeting and left the house. I drove to Margaret Cho's office in Alpharetta, parked in the lot, and sat in my car for 3 minutes looking at the legal pad and the screenshot on my phone. Your husband bought me a house. We're getting married next month. What would a lesser version of me have done? Screamed. Thrown things. Confronted him at the breakfast table with shaking hands and a voice that broke. And then what? Given him time to hide money, close accounts, consult his own lawyer while I was still in pieces. No, I was not going to be the wife who fell apart. I was going to be the woman who prepared. I picked up my bag, walked into the building, and told the receptionist that I had an 8 o'clock with Ms. Cho. The plan was already breathing. Margaret Cho's office was exactly what I needed it to be. Quiet, orderly, and without sentimentality. She was a small woman in her mid-50s with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head. She had a yellow legal pad of her own, and she used it. We sat across from each other at a clean oak table, and I told her everything. Not just the text message, but the timeline, the gym bag, the Thursdays, the different soap, Ronnie's alibi, all of it, in the flat sequential way I had organized it in my own mind through the sleepless hours before dawn. Margaret took notes. When I finished, she set her pen down. First question, she said. Are you certain you want to proceed with divorce? I'm certain I want to understand what I have before I make any decision, I said. But yes, I think we both know where this goes. She nodded. Smart answer. Okay, here's what we do. She walked me through it with the kind of methodical calm that I imagine surgeons have. Clean cuts, correct sequence. First, she would initiate a title search on Daniel under his full legal name. Daniel Aaron Hartwell, within Fulton, Cherokee, and Forsyth counties, looking for any property transactions in the past 3 years. This was public record, entirely legal. Second, I would need to begin gathering documentation, tax returns, bank statements, any business filings I had access to. Third, and she said this carefully, I should speak to no one. Not my sister, not my closest friend, no one who might, even accidentally, say something that reached Daniel. How long does a title search take? I asked. 48 hours, sometimes less. I went to work after that. I sat in my office on the 4th floor of the hospital and I did my job. Answered emails, approved budget line items, met with a department head about staffing, and I was completely, deliberately normal. If anyone had looked at me that day, they would have seen a capable hospital administrator in the middle of an ordinary Wednesday. Inside, I was mapping every financial document I had access to and noting every one I didn't. Daniel called at noon to ask if I wanted him to pick up dinner. I said yes, thank you, whatever you feel like. He said he was thinking Thai. I said that sounded perfect. We hung up. The second day was harder. I don't know what shifted. Maybe something small in my behavior, some microscopic change in temperature. But that evening, Daniel looked at me across the dinner table for a moment longer than usual. He was not a stupid man. He was charming and reckless and dishonest, but he was not stupid. "You seem tired," he said. "Long week," I said. "It's Wednesday." "Exactly," I said, and smiled, and he laughed, and the moment passed. But I noticed it. He was starting to feel something, some animal instinct that the air had changed. I had perhaps 48 more hours of clean cover, and I did not intend to waste them. The title search results came back in 31 hours. Margaret called me on my cell during my lunch break. I stepped into a stairwell where no one would see my face. "I found it," she said. "A property at 142 Willow Creek Drive in Canton, Georgia. A single-family home, 2,400 square feet, purchased 11 weeks ago for $347,000. Titled under the name of an LLC, Hartwell Ventures Holdings, LLC, which, Margaret told me, had been registered in Georgia 14 months earlier. The registered agent, Daniel Aaron Hartwell. He hadn't put it in Brittany's name. He'd put it in a company he controlled, which meant the asset was technically a business asset. And if he had used marital funds to capitalize that company, it became marital property subject to division. I stood in the stairwell and I felt the floor shift beneath me, not in collapse, but in the way the ground shifts when a lock finally opens and a door swings wide. This was not suspicion anymore. This was a deed, a filing date, a paper trail. "Can you get the LLC registration documents?" I asked. "Already requested," Margaret said. "And I'm recommending a forensic accountant, someone who does this specifically, traces assets through business entities. I have someone good. His name is Robert Finch." "Set it up," I said. I went back to my desk. I ate my lunch. I opened a spreadsheet on my second monitor, and under the guise of hospital budget work, I began building a private chronology. Dates, amounts, property values, account numbers I had quietly photographed from statements in Daniel's filing cabinet over the previous 2 evenings while he watched television. He'd been financing Brittany's life, and our money had built the foundation of it. That evening at home, Daniel was affectionate. He touched my shoulder when he passed me in the kitchen. He asked if I wanted to watch something together. He poured me a glass of wine without being asked. I accepted all of it graciously. I sat beside him on the couch. I watched the show he chose. I let him put his arm around me, and I thought, "You have no idea what I spent today doing." That thought should have frightened me. Instead, it steadied me. I had crossed some internal threshold, the place where shock becomes strategy, where pain becomes precision. There was no going back from what I now knew. The only direction was forward. The point of no return had passed quietly in a stairwell over a phone call at noon. The following Monday, Margaret filed for divorce on my behalf. I was not at the house when Daniel was served. I had arranged that deliberately. Checked into a room at the Marriott on GA 400 the night before, telling Daniel I had a 2-day hospital conference in Marietta. By 10 a.m., a process server had knocked on the door of our house on Sycamore Ridge, and Daniel Aaron Hartwell had been handed a manila envelope containing a petition for divorce, a notice of automatic financial restraining order, which, in Georgia, prohibits either party from dissipating marital assets upon filing, and a discovery request for all financial records related to Hartwell Ventures Holdings, LLC. Margaret had also simultaneously filed a motion for forensic accounting of all joint and business accounts. I was sitting in my hotel room when she called to confirm service. I looked out the window at the pale May sky and felt not satisfaction, not quite. Something quieter. Relief, maybe, that the first move was made and couldn't be unmade. My phone rang 11 minutes later. Daniel. I let it go to voicemail. His message was 4 words. Call me right now. Then, 6 minutes after that, a number I didn't recognize. Female voice. When I listened to that voicemail, I heard the voice of a woman who was not used to being caught off guard. "This is Brittany Calloway," she said. "I think we should talk." I found it interesting that she called rather than texted, as if she'd learned, since that first message, that texts could be used as evidence. I saved both voicemails and forwarded the recordings to Margaret. The calls escalated over the following 48 hours in a way that told me everything about how frightened they both were. Daniel called 14 times in 2 days. He texted in long paragraphs. First conciliatory. "Lauren, please let me explain." Then wounded. "I can't believe you'd do this without even talking to me." Then, by the second evening, something harder edged. "You know my business will survive this. You should think carefully about what you're starting." That was the first threat, thin as paper, but there. I screenshotted it and sent it to Margaret. Brittany was more direct. She appeared at my hotel on the second afternoon. I still don't know how she found out where I was staying, which told me Daniel had resources I hadn't fully mapped. She was younger than I'd imagined, late 20s, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been wrong about a man before. She stood in the lobby and called my cell until I answered. "Come down," she said. "I'm not going to make a scene. I just need 5 minutes." I went down. I sat across from her at a lobby table and I looked at her, really looked, and thought, he told you things about me, didn't he? He made me small so you'd feel big. She didn't waste time. She told me, in a voice that was controlled but not comfortable, that Daniel had restructured the LLC specifically in a way that would make it very difficult to prove marital funds had been used, that he had a lawyer, a very good one, she said, who'd been preparing for this possibility for months, that if I pushed on the forensic accounting, it would take years and cost me more in legal fees than I'd recover. Then she leaned forward slightly. "He's willing to offer you the house and 18 months of support. No trial, no discovery, no public record of any of this. Clean and quiet." I looked at her for a moment. "Did he send you to deliver this?" I asked. She didn't answer. Which was the answer? "Tell him I'll be in touch through my attorney," I said, stood up and walked back to the elevator. My hands were not shaking, but in the elevator, alone, I pressed my back against the wall and breathed slowly for a count of 10. What she had described, years of litigation, mounting legal fees, a lawyer who had been preparing for months, was not nothing. It was designed to sound exhausting, because exhaustion was their weapon. They wanted me to calculate the cost and decide it was too high. But here is what Brittany didn't know because Daniel didn't know it. Robert Finch, the forensic accountant Margaret had hired, had already found 3 wire transfers from our joint savings account totaling $61,000, moved in 11-month intervals into a business account, and from there into the LLC that had purchased the house in Canton. Marital funds, documented, traceable. That was not a circumstantial case. That was a paper trail. I called Margaret that evening and told her about Brittany's visit. "They're scared," Margaret said simply. "I know," I said. "Keep going." The hearing on the forensic accounting motion was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, I moved back to the house on Sycamore Ridge. Daniel had relocated himself, without being asked, to what I assumed was Brittany's house in Canton. And I gave myself 4 days of deliberate quiet. I took Chester for long walks in the evenings. I slept. I cooked real meals instead of hotel food. I called my doctor and made an appointment I had been postponing for months. I sat on the porch in the mornings with coffee and listened to the neighborhood sounds. Sprinklers, birds, a child 2 houses down learning to ride a bike. I didn't call anyone. I didn't explain anything to anyone. I just let myself breathe. It was the most intentional rest I had ever taken. The offer came again, dressed differently this time. 10 days after I'd returned to the house, Daniel's attorney, a man named Philip Greer, whose firm had offices in Midtown Atlanta and whose reputation Margaret had described as aggressive but not stupid, sent a formal letter proposing a settlement conference. The new terms were more generous. The house, full equity, 36 months of support, and a lump sum of $45,000. In exchange, I would drop the forensic accounting motion and agree not to pursue any claims against Hartwell Ventures Holdings, LLC. I read the letter twice. Then I put it on the kitchen table and made tea and read it once more. What they were offering me was the known world, the house I had loved, a financial buffer, a tidy ending. And they were offering it, I understood, because they were afraid of what Robert Finch was going to find when he was done looking. The $61,000 in wire transfers was the tip. There may have been more beneath it. The settlement offer was not generosity. It was a lid, pressed down on something they didn't want opened. I wrote a note on a legal pad, "Decline, continue." I sent it to Margaret in those exact words. Daniel apparently had expected a different answer. 2 days later, he showed up at the house. His key still worked, which I remedied within the hour by calling a locksmith. With a bottle of wine and an expression I recognized from 14 years of marriage. It was the face he made when he was turning on the voltage. Warm eyes, a particular angle of the jaw, that half smile that once, in a different life, had made me feel lucky. "Lauren," he said from the doorway because I had not let him pass the threshold. "Can we just talk? Like 2 people who know each other?" "We can talk through our attorneys," I said. "That's not who we are." "It's who we are now," I said, and I closed the door. I heard him stand on the porch for a moment, long enough that I knew he was deciding something, recalibrating. Then I heard his car leave. I changed the locks within the hour, as I said, and I forwarded the incident to Margaret, noting the time and the substance of the attempt. After that, the calls stopped. The texts stopped. Philip Greer's office went quiet. I knew they were watching, waiting to see if the silence would unsettle me, if the absence of pressure would make me doubt the cost of continuing. It is a particular kind of manipulation, the strategic withdrawal. It says, we are patient. Are you? I was patient. I had been patient for months already without knowing I was doing it. But I also knew, and this was the thing that the 4 days of rest had clarified for me, that I had been carrying all of this alone, and that alone is a weight that compounds over time. Margaret was my legal support. Robert Finch was my financial support. But I had no one in my ordinary life who knew what was happening to me, and that had begun to feel less like strategy and more like isolation. I called my sister Carol in Savannah. We had not spoken properly since Christmas. Carol was 3 years older than me, a high school principal, sensible and unshockable in the way of women who have spent their careers managing other people's crises. I drove to her house on a Saturday. 3.5 hours south on a 16, Chester asleep in the back seat. And I sat at her kitchen table and I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. She didn't cry. When I finished, she poured us both more coffee and said, "What do you need from me?" I had to think about that. "I just need someone who knows," I said. "I need one person in the world who knows." "I know," she said. "I'm here." I stayed the weekend. We walked on the waterfront on Sunday morning, and we talked about things that had nothing to do with Daniel. Our mother's garden, a book Carol was reading, the way the light came off the Savannah River in the morning. Simple, ordinary things that existed in a world outside of legal filings and wire transfers and a woman named Brittany Calloway. When I drove back to Atlanta on Sunday evening, the weight was not gone, but it was distributed differently, shared, which made it bearable in a way that solitary endurance doesn't. I was not alone anymore. That mattered more than I can explain. They came together this time. It was a Thursday evening. The irony of the day was not lost on me. And I heard 2 cars pull into the driveway. I looked through the front window and saw Daniel's black Lexus, and behind it, a silver Honda. I recognized from a photo Margaret's investigator had quietly taken during the early weeks of the case. Brittany Calloway walked up my porch steps alongside my husband. I had 2 options in that moment. Call the police, which would have been legitimate but premature, or open the door, listen, and let them show me exactly who they were. I opened the door. They stood on my porch, on my house, with its wraparound wooden railings that Daniel had once called the thing that sold me on this place. And they presented themselves with the careful composure of people who had rehearsed the conversation. Daniel was in a sport coat. Brittany was in a silk blouse and blazer combination that was clearly intended to signal respectability, authority, someone you take seriously. "We're not here to fight," Daniel said. "We just want to be honest with you." That word, honest, from his mouth in that doorway. I remember noting it the way you note a car that runs a red light. You see it. You say nothing. You remember. He spoke first, and what he said was structured very carefully. He acknowledged that he had handled things poorly. He said that Brittany was part of his life now and that he wanted everyone to move forward without destroying each other. He told me the house in Canton, and here he looked at me steadily, had been purchased with business funds, not marital funds, and that any forensic accountant worth his fees would confirm that. He said Robert Finch would find what the records showed, and the records had been properly maintained. Properly maintained, a careful phrase. Then Brittany spoke. She was composed, even warm. The warmth of someone who has decided to be magnanimous in what she believes is her victory. She said she understood this was painful. She said she had actually always respected me, which was the most startling sentence I had heard in the entire proceeding. She said that she and Daniel wanted to offer me something fair and final: the original house, the equity, 48 months of support, and an agreement to close the LLC claims permanently. They were increasing the offer, which meant the forensic accountant was getting closer to something they didn't want found. Then Daniel's tone shifted, just slightly, a quarter turn like a key in a lock. "Lauren," he said, "think about what a trial does. Your name in the Fulton County Public Record, my business contacts, people we've known for years, dragged into depositions. Carol." He paused on my sister's name for a beat. "You really want to put Carol through a deposition about family finances?" There it was, not a threat technically, just a landscape painted for my benefit of how bad things could become. Brittany added more softly, "We just want this to be over, don't you?" I looked at them both, two people on my porch in good clothes, holding a settlement like a peace offering, with a knife behind their backs. Did I feel fear? Yes. I want to be honest about that. When Daniel said Carol's name, something cold moved through me. The particular fear of having someone else pulled into the damage you're navigating. The worry that my determination to pursue full justice might cost people I loved their peace. For approximately 4 seconds, I felt that fear completely. Then I said, "I'll have Margaret contact Philip Greer about your proposal." "Lauren," Daniel started. "We're done here," I said. "Please leave my property." The composure cracked, just slightly, around Brittany's eyes. Daniel's jaw tightened. He held my gaze for a long moment, trying, I think, to find the version of me he could manage, the version he'd lived with for 14 years, the one who kept the peace. And he found someone he didn't entirely recognize. They left. I closed the door and locked it. I stood in the hallway for a moment with my hand flat against the wood. Yes, I was afraid. Daniel mentioning Carol had shaken something. The possibility of dragging her, calm, private Carol, who had done nothing except be my sister, into a legal proceeding was genuinely painful to consider. But here is what that fear did to me. It made me angry. Clean, focused, cold, angry. Because the fact that he had said her name, that he had stood on my porch and invoked my sister as a pressure point, told me exactly what kind of man I had been married to, exactly what the last 14 years had actually contained that I hadn't seen clearly until this moment. I went to my desk. I opened my laptop. I wrote Margaret a 3-paragraph email describing the visit in precise detail, including the exact words Daniel had said about Carol, including the time they arrived and the time they left. I sent it at 9:14 p.m. Then I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, sat in the chair by the window, and watched the streetlight come on in the driveway. The fear had passed through me and left something behind, something harder and cleaner, something that had no intention of stopping. The forensic accounting hearing was on a Tuesday in late July in a courtroom on the 6th floor of the Fulton County Courthouse in downtown Atlanta. I had been in that building before. Once, years ago, for a hospital contract review that had briefly required my presence. I remembered the marble floors, the particular acoustic quality of a space designed to contain serious things. That morning, I wore a navy blazer and a white blouse, drove myself downtown, and parked in the deck on Pryor Street. I sat in my car for exactly 4 minutes before going in. Margaret was already there with Robert Finch. Finch was a compact, quietly confident man of about 60, who dressed like a retired academic and testified like a surgeon. Slow, methodical, no unnecessary syllables. He had been doing this for 31 years. He had testified in more than 200 cases. He had brought a binder. Daniel's attorney, Philip Greer, was already at the opposing table when we entered. Daniel sat beside him in a charcoal suit, looking controlled. Brittany was not in the courtroom. I had noted in the weeks leading up to this that Brittany had gone increasingly quiet. Fewer mentions of her in documents, no further contact attempts. I did not know exactly what that meant, but I filed it away. The hearing began. Philip Greer argued that Hartwell Ventures Holdings, LLC, was a properly constituted separate business entity, that its capitalization had come from Daniel's premarital savings and business revenues, and that the property at 142 Willow Creek Drive was therefore a business asset not subject to marital division. He spoke with confidence, with the polished cadence of someone who had made this argument before and won. Then Robert Finch took the stand. He had brought the binder. What followed was 40 minutes of the most methodical dismantling I have ever witnessed. Finch traced 3 wire transfers from our joint savings account: $19,000 in February of last year, $22,000 in August, and $20,000 in November. Each moved into an intermediate account in Daniel's name alone, and from there, within 14 to 19 business days, into the operating account of Hartwell Ventures Holdings, LLC. Total, $61,000. He documented the dates, the account routing numbers, the transaction reference codes. He then presented LLC bank statements, subpoenaed, not volunteered, showing that those funds had been part of the $130,000 cash component of the Canton property purchase, meaning nearly half the down payment on Brittany's house had come from our joint savings account. He also presented something I hadn't known about until that morning: a 5th wire transfer that he had found in the course of extended discovery, a transfer of $8,200, moved 3 months earlier than the others into the same intermediate account, categorized on Daniel's personal tax return as a consulting reimbursement. There was no corresponding consulting contract. There was no invoice. There was no client. Greer objected 4 times during Finch's testimony. The judge sustained one of them, a minor point about document formatting, and overruled the other 3. Then Greer cross-examined Finch. He tried for approximately 20 minutes to establish that the wire transfers could have originated from Daniel's business revenues rather than the joint account. Finch answered each question with a precision that was almost kind, the way a surgeon explains what they found, leaving no room for alternative interpretation. The account numbers were specific. The timing was documented. The trail was clear. About 12 minutes into cross-examination, something shifted in Philip Greer's posture. A small adjustment, a slight loosening of the shoulders, a fractional slowing of his cadence, the adjustment of a man who is revising his position in real time. Daniel, at the table, had stopped looking at the witness. He was looking at the table. I sat beside Margaret, and I did not allow my expression to change. I had thought about this moment many times over the past weeks, imagined it as a confrontation, a revelation, something that would feel dramatic and fierce. What it actually felt like was something calmer than that. It felt like the truth being stated plainly in a room designed for that purpose by someone who had done the work. The judge, a measured woman in her late 50s named Honorable Diana Kessler, reviewed the submitted exhibits and issued a preliminary ruling from the bench. The wire transfers constituted, in her determination, a commingling of marital and business funds sufficient to support the plaintiff's claim. The LLC assets, including the property at 142 Willow Creek Drive, would be subject to inclusion in the marital estate for purposes of equitable distribution. Full discovery of all LLC financial records was ordered within 30 days. Philip Greer requested a recess. The judge granted 10 minutes. In the hallway, I stood with Margaret and Robert Finch near the window overlooking Pryor Street. Margaret was making notes. Finch was reviewing his binder. Neither of them was celebrating. That was not how professionals in this work operated. But there was a steadiness between us that I recognized as the particular solidarity of people who had prepared correctly. When we returned to the courtroom, Greer approached Margaret before the session resumed. "My client is prepared to discuss an amended settlement," he said quietly. Margaret looked at him calmly. "We'll review any written proposal," she said, "but we're continuing discovery as ordered." Greer nodded and returned to his table. Daniel looked up as I walked past. Our eyes met for the first and only time that day. I don't know what he saw in my face. I kept it neutral. Not cold, not triumphant, just steady. The face of someone who had done what needed doing. I looked away first, not because I was uncertain, because I was done looking at him. The amended settlement offer arrived in writing 8 days later. I read it on a Saturday morning at the kitchen table with coffee and Chester at my feet. It was a different document from anything that had come before. No confident tone, no carefully framed threats about public records or my sister's name. Just numbers, specific and complete. Daniel's attorneys proposed full title to the house on Sycamore Ridge, all equity. A cash settlement of $218,000, representing my equitable share of the commingled funds used in the LLC, plus interest calculated from the date of each transfer. Division of the joint savings account, 50-50, $47,000 to each party, 60 months of spousal support, and this was the part that Margaret had fought for specifically, a full accounting of all Hartwell Ventures holdings, LLC assets, to be signed and notarized, with a penalty clause attached for any subsequent discovery of undisclosed assets. He was giving me nearly everything, because the alternative, full discovery, full trial, 30 days of forensic accounting opening every file in his business, was something he couldn't afford in any sense of the word. Margaret had also done something I hadn't asked for but would later understand as the final piece. She had filed the porch incident. Daniel and Brittany arriving uninvited, Daniel's reference to Carol, as a documented instance of intimidation. It hadn't risen to a restraining order, but it was on record. In negotiation, record matters. I signed the settlement agreement on a Wednesday in August. The house, all of it, the mortgage paid current, the title transferred cleanly into my name alone, was mine. The cash settlement was deposited into a new individual account I had opened at a different bank in April, the same week I'd first met with Margaret. The joint account was divided and closed. Daniel's attorney confirmed in a separate letter that Daniel had vacated any claim to items of personal property at the Sycamore Ridge address. I called Margaret afterward and thanked her. "You did the hard part," she said. "You kept your head." What happened to Daniel and Brittany in the weeks and months that followed, I learned through the ordinary channels of a shared community. Mutual acquaintances, professional networks, the ambient information of a life lived in one geographic area for many years. The full forensic discovery, which had proceeded in parallel with settlement negotiations, and which Daniel had apparently hoped to close down with the settlement agreement, had turned up 2 additional irregularities in Hartwell Ventures Holdings. The penalty clause in our settlement, which required disclosure of all LLC assets, meant that those irregularities now had potential civil liability attached to them. Robert Finch had noted them in his final report. Margaret had attached the report to the settlement as an exhibit. 2 of Daniel's longtime business partners, men he'd worked with for 8 and 11 years respectively, began asking questions that Daniel apparently could not answer to their satisfaction. One partnership dissolved in September. The other was still being negotiated as of that fall. Brittany Calloway, I learned through a LinkedIn connection we shared, had quietly stopped listing Daniel Hartwell as an associate in her social profiles in late summer. By September, she had moved out of the house in Canton. I don't know where, I didn't look. The house in Canton, 142 Willow Creek Drive, purchased for $347,000, titled through an LLC, now under forensic scrutiny and civil settlement, was listed for sale in October at $329,000. It sat on the market. Daniel's business was not destroyed. I want to be accurate about that because accuracy has always mattered more to me than drama. It was damaged, structurally, financially, reputationally, in ways that would take years to fully assess. He had not gone to prison. He had not lost everything, but he had lost the story he'd been telling about himself, which for a man of his particular character may have been the loss that cost the most. I did not think about what it cost him for very long. What I thought about on the morning the title transferred and the house on Sycamore Ridge became unambiguously mine was the woman who had sat at this kitchen table at 2:30 in the morning with a legal pad and a phone, drawing a map in the dark. She had been afraid. She had been precise. She had not let the fear stop the precision. That was the whole of it. Fall came to Sycamore Ridge the way it always did. Slowly at first, then all at once. The maples along the back fence went orange in late October, and I raked leaves on a Saturday afternoon with the radio on and Chester supervising from his spot by the back steps. And I noticed that I was not bracing for anything. That had become the new baseline. Not tension, not vigilance, just the unremarkable piece of a life that belonged to me. I made changes. The $218,000 settlement went into a managed investment account. In January, I accepted a senior VP position at a hospital network in Athens. A 22% salary increase, a step up, a life that expanded in every direction I pointed it. I joined the neighborhood book club Daniel had always found tedious. I started hiking Sunday mornings on a trail at Red Top Mountain I'd driven past 100 times and never stopped for. I found in the quiet of the house on winter evenings that I liked my own company considerably, that the silence which had once felt lonely now felt like space. Carol drove up from Savannah in November and stayed a long weekend, and by the time she left, I had really remembered, that I had a life outside of what had been done to me. Daniel, as I heard through mutual acquaintances, was having a different kind of year. Both business partnerships dissolved. The reputational complications that Robert Finch's report had set in motion traveled quietly through the regional real estate market, the way these things do. He had moved into an apartment in Dunwoody. The house in Canton sold in November for $311,000, $36,000 below asking. And after the LLC's legal fees and the civil settlement, left him with very little. Brittany Calloway had relocated to Charlotte, a new city, a new job, and presumably a set of lessons she was in the process of learning. I did not feel satisfaction about their difficulties the way I might have expected. What I felt was distance, the particular calm of having moved far enough from a fire that its heat no longer reaches you. By the following spring, almost exactly a year after that text message arrived at 2:17 a.m., I stood on the wraparound porch with coffee and looked at the yard and thought about the woman who had believed a quiet life was the same as a good life. She had been wrong. A quiet life can be a hidden life, one with concealed architecture, built partly on someone else's deception. A good life is one where the ground beneath you is real. I had that now. Chester sat beside me on the porch, gray-muzzled and warm. The morning was quiet. The street came awake. It was mine. That's the whole of it. 14 years, one text message, one legal pad, one phone call in the dark. What I learned is simple, though it took all of that to learn it. Information is power, but only if you move quietly long enough to gather it. Fear is not the opposite of courage. It is the thing courage runs on. And the moment you decide to be precise instead of reactive, you have already won something that no settlement agreement can give you. What would you have done? At 2:17 in the morning, in the dark, with that message on your phone? I think about that. I think everyone who hears this story should. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think or breathe differently or see something in your own life more clearly, I hope you'll share it. And thank you, genuinely, for listening all the way to the end. That kind of attention is not a small thing.